Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I've got something rather special for you. If you love the conversations that we have here on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast, I'd like to invite you to join our free weekly newsletter. Sign up now, and the link is on the spiel that goes with the podcast. Between now and the end of August 26th, you've got the chance of winning one of 50 digital subscriptions to the Journal of Biophilic Design itself. And if you didn't know, it's full jammed packed of architecture, interior design, thought leadership, science, research, case studies, and much, much more. And as a member as well, you get discount and priority on many of the events. So please sign up to, or go to the journal of biophilicdesign.com and you can sign up there. Or, of course, you can also click on the link that is with the words that go with the podcast. Thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast today. I am joined by physicist and psychotherapist Lincoln Stoller, whose father, Ezra Stoller, was called the pre-eminent architectural photographer of the day. And he grew up in a family and within a community of modern designers. And for those of us working in biophilic design, you might be interested to learn that Frank Lloyd Wright wanted only Ezra to photograph his finished projects, and we're going to be talking about that shortly. I'm a photographer myself, and when I saw the images that Lincoln had sent me, I immediately could feel that communication between architecture and the beholder. And I think that's exactly what Eye of the Beholder, which is a book of Ezra's work, which Lincoln is publishing now, and this podcast is going to explore. So, well, first of all, Lincoln, many thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Vanessa. It's important.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please? I've introduced you as physicist and psychotherapist, but you have such a rich life and do some very rewarding things.
It's hard to say these things without sounding, dramatic, but I have a nature-oriented life. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in the woods. My siblings were older, so it was by myself. My father was a compulsive worker, and my mother was a compulsive artist, so it was more by myself. And, you don't know these things happening when they're happening, but I guess it sort of grew its tendrils into me, and I felt comfortable in the suburban woods. Well, when you're small, even suburban woods seem big. So I think most of the two important things in my life where I was kind of a rebel in school. I was taking my father's high intellectual and artistic aspirations to heart, and I found school mediocre and insincere, and I complained, and that annoyed everyone. And then I started into what turned out to be mountaineering when I was 13. I ended up going all over the place, and that was more nature and intense nature. And now I'm a psychotherapist through various twists and turns, and some of my clients are climbers.
Okay.
And so we talk about it because of its psychological and how it's impacted us. So in between there, just around the ages of 10 to 13, I worked with my father, which was a very important bonding thing because he was like obsessed with his work. And I didn't have much of a father figure, so that when I could be his assistant, it was a very important connection, at least for me. And then I got to take that whole nature thing into these architectural works, which were odd because we were photographing them sort of in vitro. The people were removed, except in some cases, but mostly they were empty of people. So it was fun to run around, but it was also sort of, I was infected with the bug of whatever the architects put into the structure, because there was no mediating. I was just in connection with their structures. So I have this relationship with my father and his work and architecture and space and nature. And then I thought science was going to be a answer to things. And it is sort of, at least in this age. So I became a physicist, which I returned to this year
Okay.
after becoming a psychotherapist and neuropsychologist. But I was always interested in all those things. And so now it's a big jumble. It's one of the things I tell my clients and myself is that you really have to get to the point of chaos to be creative. And that's a funny point because you feel out of control and lost and uncertain. And it's exactly what you don't want often when you're looking for certainty and answers. But it's the essential point where you find novelty and insight.
Yeah.
And it isn't always great and wonderful and comforting. And sometimes it's quite disturbing.
And I hear you with the chaos thing. Obviously, being an artist myself, it's like there's plans, calmness, and then absolute chaos, and then something magic happens. So I'm also intrigued. I mean, you're a physicist and a psychotherapist, and you do the neurotherapy. It's just intriguing, this overlap completely. So we can explore that as we sort of go along, but I want to just bring us to Ezra's photography and also your view on this. And you mentioned running around with your dad, and there's a lovely photograph in the book of you looking over the wall and your feet are like dangling because you're not actually sort of on the. There's a quote in the book: "How Ezra saw the buildings he photographed may have seemed abstruse to magazine editors who hired him, but not to the architects who designed them. His photograph expressed scale, conflict, nature, conformity, self-expression, and the role of people." And I think for me, psychology and photography are sort of about, learning to see what isn't immediately obvious. And psychology helps us understand maybe the unseen patterns of the mind. And your father's photography definitely revealed these qualities of architecture, I think, that people might otherwise have overlooked and maybe still do overlook because these buildings are still standing. Do you think the greatest architecture works in much the same way, that its deepest impact isn't always visible, but felt?
I have my own understanding, and it mixes up all the things we've been talking about. Not you and I, but sort of the academic world has divided thinking into emotional and intellectual. And I think it's missing what I call associations.
Mm-hmm.
Associations are things that come up that connect disparate elements and leave us to figure out how they're connected. That's not essentially emotional, nor is it intellectual. It's sort of the beginning. Both feed into it. So I really emphasize the associations we make. And I think exploring associations without preconception and guidance leads to things like hallucinations, dreams, inspiration, creativity, insight, change, growth. I think the essence of good experience, photographs and otherwise, is to call into your mind things that you didn't see before, didn't feel before, didn't think before, and sort of just throw you in that landscape of figuring it out. They're destabilizing, right? Because you want to reconfigure. I have to say this, I'm very interested in learning, which you can understand is deeply part of the evolutionary process. At the same time that modern architecture and modern art and computation and science were going through these 20th century revolutions, there was this thing called cybernetics, which made a brief appearance and is basically about communication and control. And then it kind of disappeared, and we don't hear about it anymore. So one of the interesting books on the topic described education very simply, described learning very simply in three ways. Memory, you memorize. You solve problems, or you learn to solve problems. Or thirdly, you transform. And very rarely are we taught how to transform. We're told to memorize and solve problems, and that's pretty much school in a nutshell. But we're not taught how to transform because that's a nightmare. Transforming is exactly what institutions don't want you to do. It kicks the, foundations out from under them. So that I think the most important thing in almost anything we do is that third stage of learning. And how do you get exposed to it? Through, I think, experience. And nature is the most intense, can be complex, intense, involved, integrated experience.
Do you think that the greatest impact of architecture, of good architecture, of the greatest architecture, and however we define that, it could be your definition, but do you think that architecture works in that same way, that the biggest impact on us isn't always visible? Maybe it's felt.
Well, it's certainly, well, what does visible mean? Does it mean you see it in pictures, or does it mean you conceive of it? The greatest impact is beyond what you know, because that's where you're going.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a mystery how you can take, I mean, the whole thing of a photograph having any impact at all. You know, another interesting story is, let me recall, it was a guy who had brain damage and was blind his whole life. And then he was given a surgery where he could see. And when he could see, he couldn't understand what he saw. It didn't make sense. He didn't know, he hadn't sort of built those circuits that automatically recognized things. So when he saw a car, he had to think it through. You know, doors, wheels, vehicle. Oh, it's a car. And so you see an image, and well, this is the photographer's skill, how to make that image pop in your mind to make you associate, think, emote, or remember stuff. And this is where Ezra had a particular skill. And it's funny because architects don't. They're thinking in 3 dimensions, and they're thinking in motion and space and light. But a photograph, unless you know how to picture it and understand it, is just a kind of puzzle that you have to figure out. So if you look at what Ezra did, and you listen to some of the narratives in the book, people say the things he did, he made many vistas, so that there were images inside images. There were passageways and windows and other images in the passageways and the windows. And in that way, it made you think in the exterior and the interior, and to feel constrained and to feel unconstrained, all at sort of the same time. And that's what breaks you out of your patterns, I think. If the reader or viewer can see it, and that's the skill of the photographer or the architect, depending on what dimensions and experience you're talking about. Yeah. But like I said, and you recognize that most people just see these from the photographs. Mm-hmm. So it's like learning about life through literature. It's mm-hmm. remote. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a lot of people can read literature and it doesn't mean anything, certainly. When I was in my rebellious phase, I would try to read, you know, these great works of Dostoevsky and Proust, and I didn't know what they were talking about. Yeah. Today I might know better. So yeah, obviously it's beyond visual. That's mm-hmm. just the start. Yeah, exactly. But if you know, not that I'm the same as your father was, but there are moments when I've been with a camera and I've been on my own in a building or in a space or a place, and it could be a forest, it could be in a hospital, it could be anywhere where I'm just documenting something and I happen to be there on my own. There is a communication that you have as a photographer in that moment, and it sort of enters you. It fills you and the camera up as you're moving around the building and the space, and somehow time stops. And I think this is why I was so intrigued by your dad's photography, was that it was a recognition within me that I saw in your father's work, that he had this unique ability to be able to communicate the unsung bits of a building. And so we experience it in a completely different way. And I just want to segue now into just Frank Lloyd Wright, because he said that, he had, your father had an extraordinary relationship with Frank Wright, who, when the people said, "Oh, can Ezra go and photograph the buildings? What shall he do?" You know, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, Ezra will know," because he knew what he was going to do. He knew he was going to, create something amazing within the camera. What do you think Wright recognized in your father that made him trust him so completely? I'd like to answer that Obliquely. First, to go step back, people think of photographs as images that are still.
No.
But Ezra didn't see that. I think Philip Johnson coined the word processional in terms of photography. Ezra saw the photographs as a procession through the building.
Yeah.
They weren't just single snapshots. Yeah. And so he photographed a job as a movement through the building, not a moving picture, although that's another way you could approach it, but more as a slideshow through the building, sequentially through the spaces. And of course, that's not how it was presented in magazines. And I tried to do that in my book.
Yeah.
And he did that in the few books that he authored, a series called Building Blocks, focusing on specific buildings, so that the photograph has to be understood a little larger than just one picture. I surmise that they both appreciated the ineffable.
Yeah.
I say that because Wright ceaselessly lectured in an attempt to convey his aesthetic, yet his words were largely overlooked and his effect was through his work. I mean, people talk about what he said, but mostly they laugh at it because he was so extreme. He was very histrionic and dramatic and sort of poetic, but I just don't think people really got it. But Ezra didn't engage in any of verbal stuff. He wasn't poetic. He wasn't sophistry or rhetoric or explication. And so he appreciated the stuff without the words, which is what Wright really wanted. And I think he really appreciated that. He didn't have to tell Ezra. He didn't have to undergo this frustrating, dramatic, histrionic thing. Ezra just understood. So I think it was relief to Wright. And I think there's also this difference that bonded them in that Wright was very physical. He was sexual. He was, physical, aggressive. And Ezra was sensitive and receptive. So that kind of made Wright the yang force, and Ezra was the yin force. And although it wasn't really a full expression of their personalities, that was how they worked. And it worked very well. The yin and the yang, they were perfect partners, even though they were different in age and culture. Ezra from his legacy of Eastern Europe, and Wright was very the plains, and well, yes, so they work. I think that's why they work together well.
Yeah. So it was yin and yang, different ways of being, really, and perception.
I think you could also go back. There was cultural things. The Bauhaus came out of Europe. Wright came out of transformational America. As people said, the modern movement in the U.S. was funded by industry and middle America, not middle but geographically, Michigan and that area. So there was some overlap.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight as well to people that we're going to put a link on the words that go with the podcast. You're on a Kickstarter at the moment with the book, but people, if they contribute, they can get the book. Because inside, and you just mentioned about the journey through the buildings, I think people who are interested in architecture will experience a different way of seeing a building if they look at the photography of Ezra's. I think it's important. I think for designers, for architects, to look at it in a different way as well, to kind of see it through different eyes and to experience it. And also, I think if you're, there's lots of architects that are having to churn out buildings because they're having to take jobs to make some money. It's also good to remind themselves of the beauty that architecture can be and how it can be demonstrated to the world after. It's like as a legacy. I do want to mention as well that you've written a Substack article recently just called "Is Architecture History or Prophecy?" And you suggest that architecture is much more than buildings, and it's a combination of aesthetics, ecology, politics, psychology, and culture. Do you think architecture reflects society, or do you feel it has the power to shape who we become?
I think it's a question about the nature of people, and do our actions reflect who we are or what we're capable of becoming? And I think they're two separate answers that depend on the person and the culture. Architecture in the 20th century seemed to go through a big transformation, just like many other things did. Like I say, science was revolutionized and art was revolutionized. And we kind of think of them as separate, but I don't think we should. So do we have the power to shape who we become? And it kind of gets psychotherapeutic because the people who come to me in that context, at least the ones who come to me, are looking for change. And most people don't either come to me or look for change. And the question I inevitably ask them is, are you really trying to change? Or are you just trying to shoehorn all your problems back into the shoebox of your preconceptions? And then you're supposed to do that absurd thing called retirement, as if you ever engage with life at all.
Mm.
I don't believe that you ever should ever retire, because I don't think you should retire from life. But, my father had a problem in that he didn't quite understand it, and he retired, and he wasn't satisfied. He wasn't satisfied with his work. He wasn't satisfied with his life. And, now I'm 70 and I see, yeah, you could go down that road. It seems very unappealing to me to retire. The whole notion is ridiculous. I'm just adding more and more and more. I have trouble keeping abreast with it all.
Yeah.
But I've been surprisingly successful in my own criteria. And maybe, well, it's interesting, like in physics, I seem to have solved a century-old problem, and I'm pretty sure that no one will pay any attention.
Okay, what is it? Can you share it, or can you share what that is?
Yeah, it's about the nature of reality and quantum mechanics, which
right. Well, that's quite big.
Yeah, it was quite big, but science is very conservative and very patriarchal, and it doesn't like to change. Max Planck wrote in around 1903 that science progresses one funeral at a time. And it's actually, it was research. Somebody researched that and showed, yes, it's actually true.
Yeah.
That's when science progresses, when the old people die. Well, it gets back to your question. Do you have the power to shape who you become?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm pretty pessimistic. Most people don't, and most cultures don't. I mean, you could say that this is biophilia in action. Evolution doesn't progress according to the interests of particular individuals. It is a holistic engagement. And hopefully, but I'm not sure it's true, that humans can contribute in a positive way, but I don't see it, So I think it's sort of up to us strange liminal artist types to sort of rage against the machine. And
yeah, but then I think that's for me, I think that's why there's a lot of people, a lot of designers, lots of artists, lots of creative people working in biophilic design. And people are coming to biophilic design, I think, and to biophilia, because they see a different way of designing and building and planning a city and a space and a country and a hospital and a healthcare system and schools and homes and new builds and anything else in between. There is a different way of doing it. There's a better way of doing it. And it's the way that nature's been doing it for years. And we've lost that connection. So, to the question that I, sort of was asking is, can architecture influence us? Well, yeah, I think it does. I think that our spaces have a huge impact on us. And I think if, like you're saying, if you have a different way of thinking and you want to make places better for people and for all life, then I think we can do something better. I want to bring us back and sort of come back to this architectural thing, because I'm just quoting from your book, you say that every architectural structure has an affinity of experiences that change with the time of day, the season, and the presence of others. When we talk about the impact of a building, we're talking about our experience of it and its effect on our life. And back to you as a psychologist and someone also immersed in this world of great architecture, how do you see our surroundings influencing our emotions and behavior, and even our sense of identity?
I think this is a confusion of aesthetics and awareness. And it's not that some people lack appreciation, it's that they're unaware. You see people move through spaces unaware. You see people move through the streets of New York or any big city, which of course would blow the minds of somebody from the Middle Ages without a second thought. In many cities, I like New York for this reason, people are very guarded, and but they're also able to break their bounds in ways that less structured environments don't seem to foster. So in big cities, you can often, at least in my experience, break the shell between you and other people by just sort of extending in an authentic way your personal connection. So people will be very direct and they'll test you as to whether you're trying to sell them something or being authentic. And if you pass the test, they'll be quite forthright and intimate in a kind of social way and honest, uncensored. So there's an awareness that has to happen. So going back to like therapy, trauma, deprivation, elation, depravity, and ecstasy are not aesthetic experiences. They're experience of expanded awareness. You don't sort of sit back and, judge these as works of art, your traumatic history. You explore them as new awareness. So your identity follows your awareness. And it's important, I think, to seek out the extremes, extreme awareness. That's where you find insight. But most people either can't afford, I don't think it's ever particularly comfortable, except in, like some ecstatic experiences, to have extreme awareness. It's kind of disruptive. And this is why I appreciated mountaineering, because you get a lot of extreme experiences.
Yeah.
And one of my mentors, who spent his whole life climbing, if you got to know him, you could see that he had no trouble. He had no trouble with risk. He also had no trouble with suffering. He could endure a lot. And, most architectural experiences don't involve suffering, but they might if they call you into, your childhood and your past and your sense of powerlessness. And I think, brutalism was misunderstood. Brutalism as the aesthetic of architectural purity, in that it basically created a blank canvas on which to better experience the transitions of space and color and sound and texture with less adornment and less distraction. And it's like when you put on those, ping pong goggles where you can't see anything, after a while you start to hallucinate. I think that's what brutalist architecture was trying to do. It was trying to get you to hallucinate on those big blank walls and have a transformative experience. I mean, did anyone actually do that? I think the architects could do it.
Yeah. I think if you're working in these places, though, if you're living there, it's your lived experience and you live there and you're there 24/7 all the time, I think from the research that we're finding that if you are in a very plain place and it's okay if you've got the sound and you've got soundscapes and you've got light changing throughout the building and all this kind of thing, I think that's great because you have variety and movement within a space. But if the place is flat and solid and does not move, then that has to have a negative impact on our brains. I think maybe that's probably what I'm trying to get at, really. From your perspective as a psychologist, if a building can affect us psychologically, obviously depending on, all sorts of trauma that we might have had as a child or not. But even so, I think, can it not affect our brains? Can it not affect us?
Well, I think it's a question of whether it triggers you. What do you mean by affect? Is it you calm, change, transform, give you a new idea? I'm reminded that, think of the people in your life who were inspirational or transformative. And in my experience, they were very quiet about it. So the great scientists, of which I can only think of 3 in my life, were kind of religious and poetic, but they didn't talk about it. You might see it in their work, or you might not understand how they came to these ideas because they were so out there and new. And if you asked them, they would just kind of chuckle. They still wouldn't tell you outright because I don't think you can. So I don't think you can easily explain the experience or assume that anyone's going to have the experience. I think for the people who are affected by architecture, you and me, architectural photographers and sculptors and creatives, they get it. I don't know if they get all of it, but that was Ezra's skill, was to distill as much as possible into this sort of anagram of meaning that would be recognized by the right people.
Yeah.
Right? It wouldn't be selling real estate. It would be, I think, a transformative experience. But again, could you explain it? Ezra didn't like explanations. He didn't like the words. Wright fulminated about all this creative stuff, and I think he didn't achieve the social transformation he wanted. And Ezra didn't talk about it, and he didn't achieve the transformation either. But there's the work. They both put out the work.
Yeah.
I remember going to Falling Water a couple of years ago, which is now a National Heritage Monument, and they put like 1,500 people through it each day. And you have to wonder, well, it doesn't feel like a comfortable house. It's like a psychedelic castle in which you never kind of know which direction you're pointed or what space you're going to enter next. Each vista is like a work of art. And I wonder if it transforms people. You kind of think maybe it was supposed to. It was supposed to be a weekend house. It's almost ridiculous to think of this sprawling 9,000-foot square building as a weekend house. It had at least 3 different living spaces. And you have to think of it as a work of art.
Yeah.
It's like going to a museum.
Yeah.
Well, a living museum, not a static one.
Do you think photography, and particularly your father's photography, can reveal something about architecture that people standing in front of a building might actually miss? You're welcome to highlight any photographs here in particular.
So here are some photographs that I like. And the answer is, me personally, I like the contrast between nature and human structures. So here's a selection of 6 photographs that I picked. And I don't know if you want to call them architectural. I'd call them dynamic. So this first one you see, I hope, is the spillway of the Grand Coulee Dam. I think it's emotionally impactful. It's got power, it's got structure, scale, and it's somewhat threatening. That's pretty good for a photograph.
It is. And just for people who are listening to this on Spotify, Audible, or any other platforms, if you go to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see these images. And just to describe this, there's a massive body of water that's coming down the dam, and then you have these sort of remnants of the architectural structure, sort of like the metal pilings coming out immediately in front of you. So you have these dark black silhouetted metal fingers kind of reaching up at the bottom of the photograph. And then you have this beautiful, almost like snow water kind of cascading in front of us. But it's a beautiful photograph. Sorry.
This is Dulles Airport. I love this picture because it feels upside down. This is an airport. This was by Saarinen, I think. And my father did a lot of this upside down stuff, where the heavy weight is in the top of the photograph. It's dark. It's encompassing, it's weighing down on you, and the levity is in the bottom of the photograph. So this photograph is of the roof extending out of the picture to the top, and the points to infinity are at the bottom on the horizon, the flat area where the sky is the lightest. It's hard to describe, but it certainly has a feeling.
Yeah, it does. It's like the bottom of a plane to me. It's like when you have like the wheels coming down, and you have the tail of the plane. It kind of reminds me a bit of Concorde in a way. You have the white structure at the beginning, this leg almost in the central, sort of just slightly off center as well. It's a beautiful picture. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then here's another. This is Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn was crazy poetic, that's for sure. And there's a story that he built the Salk Center in Southern California, very monumental, very brutal, and he couldn't decide what to put in the central atrium. It was not an atrium; it's a central courtyard between the whole series of 6 buildings. He wanted to know what foliage, what trees, and an artist who I didn't recognize, but apparently was well known, said, "Put nothing there, just nothing. Make it completely empty." And what he did was he put a ribbon of water running down this central open, flat empty space that goes all the way through all the buildings straight to the ocean. And so Ezra saw this, and this picture is great. It has drama and foreboding, and the sun is out of the picture, and the sky is blue, and it's unreachable. And the water is just a little ribbon flowing directly from where you stand to infinity. Anyway, we're getting into descriptions. Let me go to the next one, which I think is equally odd. This is Richard Meyer's Smith House. I love Richard Meyer's work. And Richard Meyer was a lovely person and a total pervert. And, you know, I know he was accused of being a pervert. And I actually met somebody who was accosted by his perversion. So I know it was true. But he, you know, like a lot of these artists, I guess he was slightly unhinged. But this is another photograph of light and dark and color and contrast. And it looks very much like modern art. You can't even see it as a house. So I like that picture. Two more. I think my favorite picture is this industrial Skidmore, Owington, Merring, Heinz headquarters outside of London, which is a very modern, flat, boring, endless corporate block. Well, maybe it's not so boring, but it's endless and huge. And my father took a picture of it almost completely obscured behind a huge and beautiful tree.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful. You know, it almost deprecates the architecture completely. But what could you do with that architecture? It was not human. It was totally a corporate. It looked like an anthill. And so he put it behind this tree, almost obscured. And the final one is this picture of Kitt Peak, which is a solar observatory, an observatory in Arizona just for observing the sun, which means it only had to track the sun across the sky. So it didn't have to be in a huge turret being able to point in all directions, because it only tracked one arc always across the sky, which may have changed with seasons somewhat. So it was a completely different structure. In fact, it didn't even look like a telescope. And my father took this picture. The sky is completely black. Everything merges to black at the top, and the light is at the bottom, and the structure rises up like some organic robot, and there's a little figure underneath it. And, you know, what do you say about this? It is one of these pictures that no caption would be effective. If you don't get it, then forget it. You know, you either see it and feel it, or you don't. So those are the pictures that moved me. They're definitely artistic. They're recognized as important, but I don't think the architects themselves might have felt they showcased their work well enough. You know, this was the complaint that was raised when my father was working with architects. They always wanted the picture to show the building as much as possible, but Ezra wasn't necessarily trying to show the building. He was trying to show, you know, something beyond the building. And I don't think all architects appreciated that, or at least, I mean, they were trying to sell their work. He was hired to do a spread in a magazine and showcase the, you know, work in a competitive format, but he was always sneaking in something essential and ethereal. Anyway, those are my examples.
Essential and ethereal, I think, is a good takeaway from that. Yeah, they're beautiful, Lincoln. The photography is amazing, and yeah, they just allow you to take moments to stop and think and really appreciate it. I actually can't think of another photographer that I know that the time to appreciate a piece of architecture. So thank you, and thanks for reaching out to me, Lincoln, to share the book and to share the imagery and things, and just to wind up actually and talk about your Kickstarter campaign. Obviously, you're not just publishing this book, this photography book, and as I say, it's very, really stunning. What you're doing here is preserving this really extraordinary archive, and also the stories behind it. What do you hope that readers are going to take away from your book, from the eye of the beholder?
Well, I should say that what triggered me in this project, we're trying to get the archive preserved.
Yeah.
So that these photographs are available to researchers and historians. And at one point, we approached the Getty Research Institute, which is the largest art preserving institute, and their comment was, "It's overpriced or overvalued because the work is not relevant anymore."
Okay.
And I thought, well, that was absurd. I mean, that's like saying history is no longer relevant anymore.
Exactly.
And I wasn't really sure if they were serious. I can't believe they were serious. I think they were just, jerking our chain. But on reflection, I thought, well, nobody's actually written a book that actually addressed that. There are these architecture and photography books that approach this as art or aesthetics or design or progress, but nobody's really said why this is pertinent. So I figured, well, I better write one. So that's what I tried to do. And my point was that you can't look at these just as works of art or just as structures or just as engineering marvels or just as photographs. I think you have to look at the people. What were the architects trying to say? Why were they such warped and twisted people? Not all of them, but some. And what were their clients' needs? And what is the legacy of their commission, the work? How does it fit in transformation? If you look at Niels Bohr's model of the atom, that's completely irrelevant these days. It's like a little planetary picture where electrons go around the nucleus like planets around the sun, and that's bullshit. There's not a single thing that's true about that, but it's relevant. I work in that field, and I'm often going back to what those guys said and thought and why they missed certain things and what it is they should have seen and what we may now see that we didn't see then or they didn't see then. So if you look at this work, I would hope that you would start to see that. You have to see the progression. I mean, again, there's some people who just look at it as art and other people just look at it as architecture. Other people think it's just a nice heavy coffee table book or maybe a doorstop. If you look beyond the page, even beyond the image, into the associations that it brings to mind, that it can help you understand the trajectory we're all on. I mean, does it force you to do that? No. Maybe we're preaching to the choir. The only people who will understand it are the ones who endorse it to begin with. So, what are you supposed to start to broadcast drama or false news or extravagant claims? As a scientist, I prefer reality and hope that you'll get it. That's what I say. I hope you'll get it.
Lovely. Thank you, Lincoln. Final question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like? And I'm quite intrigued to hear what you're going to say.
I think you could guess. Well, for the benefit of the earth, I would just paint out modern culture. But if I could actually do it, I wouldn't, because I don't know what's right. I mean, that's the other thing about evolution and ecology is it's very unpredictable. It's nonlinear. And, dinosaurs will rule the earth one day and they'll be extinct the next. You have to trust the evolutionary process, which is neither smooth nor always good. It rebalances ecology and extinguishes species, and modern humans aren't balanced, as is painfully obvious, and we need to evolve our minds. It seems to be our minds, in terms of our effect, that are guiding things. And, I think everybody needs to be more committed, honest, and courageous. This is what I tell all listeners. Go get psychotherapy. But don't get it from psychotherapists. Get it from people who know, people who can see beyond the world we live in into the better one. So, I guess we're back to art, right? Drama, literature, visual arts, the spaces, adventure, nature. Yeah, that's if I could take the brush, I would I would reduce modern culture back to a primal experience for everyone. And that's pretty brutal, but I just don't, that's reality. And that's how things actually progress in a more even and balanced way.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.